What if I told you that the PDGA used to be structured around transparency? They would provide information to members, attempt to make board decisions publicly, and care a lot more about the growth of the sport rather than the growth of their own power. Now, what if I told you that the same PDGA tried to change all of that and succeeded? Would it make you feel better if you thought that you had nothing to do with it? Newsflash, it happened right under our very noses, and we even had a chance to stop it. Let's take a deep dive.
I'm here with Ed Hedrick, who is PDGA number 001. Ed, you invented the disc pole hole. How has the sport progressed in the last 25 years?
Well, obviously it's done something right because it was only one guy here when I invented it, right? So from there it went to about 5,000 members. It's played in on about 400 golf courses in the world and in, I think, 12 countries now. So it's gone pretty well.
Now, today we're going to be talking about the conflict of interest in issues with the PDGA and even talk directly to a nominee for the Open PDGA Global Board of Directors. But before we do that, we have to understand how we got here, and that's by understanding where we've been. You see, back at the very beginning of our sport, you've got good old steady Ed Hedrick, PDGA number 001, and back in 1976, shortly after inventing the disc golf pole hole, he decided to start the PDGA. So what he did was he reached out to the top 100 or so players in the country, sent them a letter, and invited them to join the PDGA for a lifetime membership fee of only $10. And by 1984, the PDGA was growing, and Steady Ed realized that it no longer just belonged to him. So, at the 1984 World Championships, he handed a bottle of Hennessy Cream Ale over to Ted Smethers. Now, this symbolic gesture represented the founder of the PDGA handing over the control to the players themselves, where he felt that it always belonged. And in 1986, the first all-member elected board of directors was chosen and the official PDGA constitution was formed. Now, let's pause for a moment here. Did you know that there was a PDGA constitution formed? Don't worry. I didn't either. And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but there are some key things in this very, very important document that we need to see before we fast forward in time. Under Article 3, Section 7, they outline the privileges of active membership, which were very simple in nature: to vote and to hold office, to receive newsletters, looking at you, PDGA Magazine, to earn points in sanctioned events, to have comments to committees be duly considered and acted upon, and to become course pros and tournament directors. Now, did you catch that fourth one? To have comments to committees be duly considered and acted upon. They wanted the membership to have a voice and to be heard. Do you know who else wants that to happen? Matthew Rothstein. Now, are you not sure who that is? He's up for election for a spot on the PDGA Global Board of Directors, and he graciously agreed to sit down for an interview, which we're going to be getting to shortly. But before we do, back to the Constitution. Now, here's another very important part. Under Article 4, Section 4, Option 1, it states that no person may hold any of the offices of the director who also has a primary income or interest in a company which sells or manufactures equipment used in the sport of disc golf. The PDGA clearly wanted nothing to do with conflicts of interest, and they cared so much about it, they mentioned that exact same line word for word again in Article 5. And another important stance that the PDGA took was transparency, which can also be seen in Article 5, Section 10, where they made two extremely important distinctions. First, the PDGA shall conduct all of its affairs in the open. That means no private meetings, no executive sessions, and the membership would know what they wanted to do. And it states later in the Constitution that all members would be welcome to all of the meetings, and the dates of those meetings would be announced to members in the newsletter that they would receive. Secondly, the PDGA shall provide at cost of production and postage any document requested by an active member of the association. There shall be no written communications between directors or any committee chairperson or any written minutes of any meeting concerning the PDGA and the conduct of its business that is exempt from this requirement. Now that's a pretty powerful thing to say, because that means that any PDGA member could reach out and request a copy of anything that the PDGA produced, and no questions asked, they had to produce it, obviously barring things like personal information or private information of members, because you can't share information like that. But for the most part, everything was on the table for members to be able to have access to. And they took these active steps to ensure that everything was left in the open for members to see, because in the mind of the founder of our sport and the founder of the PDGA, the organization belongs to the members. Now, this can also be seen in other parts of the Constitution that clearly outline membership notification for things like financial records, annual budgets, course design standards, product standards, new board member nominations, and changes to the bylaws. That's a very important last one to mention. And so going back in time, we can clearly see the PDGA's intent, and the spirit of their mission was strong. The resolve was strong. Until it wasn't. Not long after the founder passed, board members started talking about modernization. The PDGA was growing in membership every single year, and they felt that the current constitution did not cover what it needed to for the growth of the sport. A lot of people would say that they always saw this coming. Now, while it was clear that things needed to be adjusted, this proved to be the perfect opportunity for some to start tightening the reins on the membership and what they were able to do. And that's when a brand new set of bylaws was drafted. They left out some very obvious sections that were seen in the Constitution and placed most of the decision-making power away from the members and into the hands of the board of directors themselves. However, making a change like this wasn't something they could just do on their own. According to the original Constitution, they had to have the members vote on it. And so that's where the modernization began. The new bylaws were lengthy and complicated, and they believed that there was no way the membership would really sit down to read it all. And I'd love to tell you that everyone did, and nothing happened. But they were right. People really didn't care, and general trust in the PDGA was strong, so strong that the new bylaws were passed, replacing the old Constitution. Now, it's one thing to say that this is what the board was trying to do. I can sit here and speculate that they were trying to make this happen and take away the rights. But it's a whole nother thing to look at the notes from one of the attorneys who was asked to review the changes to the new bylaws. And he stated that when he was on the board, he was, quote, not much interested in stripping the members of every single member right possible. The new Constitution can be amended by a simple majority of the board, so it offers no rights whatsoever. And that all it would take would be the board to say that active members are defined as members of the board, and in one singular meeting, they would control everything. So can you see the issue here? Gone were the days of transparency first. A shift was happening. Some would argue that it was a necessary shift as the sport continued to grow, but only time would tell. Now, flash forward to modern day, where we are only several days away from the current election cycle ending. And one of the big topics on the table for Matthew Rothstein is transparency. And in a few minutes, you're going to hear him talk about the importance of transparency for the growth of the sport and the future of the PDGA. Now, how do we know? I mean, we're just saying this. How do we know that transparency isn't a priority for the PDGA? You can see that by looking at the bylaws. They are a far cry from what we saw in the original Constitution. Do you remember that note that I made about how members could take comments and they would be duly considered and acted upon? Yeah, now that same point is there, but it just says that members can make comments. There's no promise of it being taken seriously or duly considered or acted upon. It's just a blanket statement that comments can be made. The new bylaws also state outright that there is no requirement for an annual member meeting, and that nominating committees can determine who the new board candidates are instead of the membership having a direct say. Now, the members still vote on the nominees for the final determination, but when it comes to who the nominees are, that's up to the nominating committee. No longer are members required to make changes to the bylaws. The board can literally do it themselves, and it is this easy. All it requires are 4 things for the bylaws to be changed. Number 1, 5 days notice for the meeting. Number 2, a quorum present by the board of directors. Number 3, the change has to be considered lawful. Who determines that? The board. And number 4, the majority of those present approve it. And that's it. No membership is required for that vote. And just like that, bylaws can be changed. Now, out of full transparency, the membership can make changes. But to do that, a petition needs to be made. 10% of active membership needs to sign it. And the board needs to think it's a lawful change. Who decides that? The board. So then if it actually makes it past that point, a vote is now put up where 66% of active members need to come to agreement for anything to happen or any changes to be made. So I'm not saying that change is completely impossible, but it's been made very obscure and difficult to do so. I mean, let's be honest here. How many of you listening or watching this knew that it even worked that way? How many of you have read the bylaws of the PDGA, the company, the organization that you pay money for your membership, or that governs the overall body of disc golf? How many of you even know what's going on in the PDGA right now? Now, one thing you could do to figure that out is you could just go read the meeting minutes from their last meeting, because that's out there and that's public, right? Problem is, the last update for the meeting minutes is from March, and we're almost done with July. And maybe it's because they haven't met. Nope. They had a meeting set for April 8th. I'm not sure if that meeting ever happened, but we have no updates since March. Also, if you look at the current minutes, they're exceedingly vague, with high-level statements that don't really mean anything, saying so-and-so presented this. And that's it. And when I say they presented this, there's no actual breakdown of the things that were talked about. Now, I understand the importance of proprietary information being, kept private, or personal information being kept private. But if you look at the minutes from before these changes happened, from before 2006, those minutes went into full detail. You could see what was going on. You could see what the topics of conversation were. And you would know the PDGA is dealing with this right now, and that can be important to me. We don't have that anymore. So the big question is, why would an organization make a change like this? Some people are arguing that it's to hide serious issues of conflict of interest and to retain all the power at the board of directors positions. On a recent post made on Facebook asking if there was conflict of interest, the comment section was very telling. Now, if you're like me, in all honesty and transparency, comment sections of the internet don't mean much of anything to me. I take them with a grain of salt. However, it wasn't so much on this one what was being said, but who was saying it. Let's take a look at a couple of those comments. First, we have Jeff Jaqua, TD of the Las Vegas Challenge, who said, "Yes, without a doubt, conflict of interest. A board member is making significant money off events the PDGA board selects. Anyone who thinks differently needs to ask for all financial information regarding such. There are other TDs out there that do awesome jobs too, but don't have the inside position to make the system work on their behalf. I also think that if ever taken to trial, a judge and jury would also say conflict of interest." Stephen Story, TD of the Texas State Championships, simply responded with "yes" in all caps. Rob Bullen, TD of the 2021 World Championship, said, "The bid was granted to a board of directors member that runs a separate organization to profit off such a bid. That is not the appearance of conflict of interest. That is evidence of conflict of interest." Zach Schaefer, former PDGA staffer, said, I personally witnessed and experienced board members lobby for their own personal interest amongst PDGA staff during my 6+ years as a PDGA staffer, to the extent of pulling particular PDGA staff to the side during summit meetings to push a vote. These influence decisions came with a substantial financial incentive for a select group. The conflict of interest within the board reaches far beyond just rewarding events. I'm currently a member only to retain my voting rights. Now, I get it. TDs, former staff, they carry weight in the conversation, but what if they're just disgruntled ex-employees or tournament directors who didn't get renewed the way they wanted to? They're not really people in power or anything. But the next comment from Brian Graham, the former PDGA executive director, the big dog at the time, he said, survey the staff anonymously and you'll find out how they really feel about board conflict of interest. So these comments created a firestorm. And the problem is, can we see any actual conflict of interest and evidence that it's deliberate? Surely the bylaws should help there, right? Wrong. The bylaws clearly state that you cannot have an ownership stake in or be an employee of a company that submits disc golf products for approval or uses support or funding of the PDGA, except for event sanctioning. There is a built-in loophole for events. And not only that, they go on to state that conflicts of interest can be overcome if the value of the person's knowledge, skills, and abilities outweigh the risks posed. My question is, where is the oversight on that? Who decides if a person's knowledge, skills, or abilities are valued enough to warrant the risk of conflict of interest? Is it the board who decides that about themselves? Something there doesn't make a lot of sense to me. In fact, in the conflict of interest policy description, they leave a lot of loopholes by suggesting that conflicts of interest don't act in the best interest of the PDGA. So they're saying that, a conflict of interest not acting in the best interest of the PDGA is a problem. But does that mean that a conflict of interest that is acting in a benefit to the PDGA is okay? As in, if someone, because of a conflict of interest, benefits themselves but also benefits the PDGA, is that okay? Where's the line drawn here? I don't know. It's very, very unclear to me. It seems very gray. And each member of the board has to sign NDAs and agreements keeping them from sharing information and disclosing potential conflicts of interest so that people can be well aware of where they may have those issues. And here are some of the current, and this is all publicly available information on the PDGA's website. You can go find it. It's not always the easiest to find, but it's out there. But here are some of the current reported conflicts of interest from the active board members right now. Owner of the Get More Group, which is a subcontractor for the DGPT. Spouse is the Disc Golf Pro Tour media director and tournament organizer. Spouse is a full-time employee for Dynamic Discs. Daughter is a touring professional. Ambassador for Innova Discs. President of an Illinois Disc Golf Club. Member of the Netherlands Flying Disc Association. Member of Team Discraft. Volunteer chair of the Paul Macbeth Foundation. An owner and operator of the Ledgestone Disc Golf. Now, are all of these disclosures problematic? No, I don't inherently think they are. Can they all be? Absolutely. Are some closer to being problematic than others? Yeah, for sure. Now, I want to throw out a caveat here. I want to take a step back and look at this for a moment, because I am not saying that I or we have documented proof of conflict of interest. And I'm not suggesting that there is malicious intent by members of the board. I'm simply stating that there is a table that has been set in a manner that now allows for conflict of interest to happen within the PDGA. And we can all agree that as the sport grows and membership increases, that we need to constantly be modernizing the bylaws and adapting. And I'm not suggesting that a simple 9-page constitution would solve everything. Also, if you do a certain amount of research into the topic, there are situations where things appear like conflicts of interest, but there's just a lot more nuance to discuss. And a great example of that is one of the leading accusations that events, particularly majors, are awarded to be ran by certain individuals, namely Nate Heinold. However, if you have never seen the bidding process for these majors and the requirements to run these events, you likely won't know that it takes nothing short of a small army to make these things happen. And I don't believe that is something that has been created to discourage the bidding process to keep power in the hands of certain people. It's just a fact. These events are monsters to run and require an enormous amount of effort and expertise. And so if bids come in that aren't able to handle the venue requirements, staffing numbers, and parking needs, etc., they're going to hand the event over to someone that has a proven track record of success. And very often there's only 1 or 2 bids, but none of them are capable of holding the event. And like him or not, Nate Heinold and the Ledgestone team, they know how to run large events and do them well. Is it a conflict of interest? Maybe in a gray area kind of way, but is it a necessary answer to some of the event problems that they're having? I think it is. Until we have concrete examples that clearly show malicious intent, we can't really say for sure on this topic. So, why do I care so much? Why should you care so much? Does any of this actually even matter? As our sport grows, I think so do its needs, problems, and complications. And the PDGA is the governing body put in place to handle those things. We as members need to be able to trust that our best interests are being kept in mind. While we can't point to actual evidence of a conflict of interest, we can all largely agree that the table has been set for it to occur. And we're in the final stages now of the next election cycle, so it's a perfect time to look for candidates who want to make a change. When thinking about the history of our sport and the steps taken to move away from transparency, Matthew Rothstein came to mind. And thankfully, he was willing to sit down for a short interview with me. So we'll cut to that right now. All right, so joining me today, I have Matthew Rothstein. How are you doing today, man?
Gary, I'm doing great. Really appreciate the invitation to come on and talk with you guys today.
Awesome. I appreciate you being here. For those out there who are kind of unaware, Matthew is one of the 5 current candidates vying for 2 open positions on the PDGA Global Board of Directors. And for those really unaware, the PDGA is currently in open voting for 2 very, very important positions on their Global Board of Directors. So the election is currently open for voting until July 31st, but don't worry, after the interview is over, I'll be sharing more information with all of you about how and where you can go and vote, because it's really, really important that you get out there and do that. But before we get into anything whatsoever, tell me a bit about yourself and your background with the PDGA, and just, for the people out there who may not know you or may not have heard some of your interviews before, just a little background.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm basically a lifelong disc golfer. Started playing as a teenager in the 90s. Didn't join the PDGA for a good number of years. I think 2012 is when I joined up. Got more involved with my local scene and organizing, and then got involved with producing media on the local level. That kind of led me to some of my first opportunities, at first with Disc Golfer Magazine as a contributing editor, and then eventually as a full-time media manager with the PDGA. So I was on staff from 2020 through 2024.
Gotcha. So what led you to the PDGA originally, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, my wife was actually the one who signed me up for the PDGA. She saw me playing all these tournaments, and she's like, you should probably make this official. But I think some of the things that really attracted me to the PDGA was the rating system. I'm a very kind of numbers and analytics type person, so I loved to see how my performance was tracking and see my progress, and that was great. And then also very competitive, so I love to get in the tournaments and push myself to kind of like play my game, when it counted. I love that feeling of being in that pressure moment. I took my first trip to the International Disc Golf Center in 2017 with my family, just as a kind of a camping trip. and went into the IDGC, saw the Ed Hedrick Memorial Museum, and just all the history and heritage that was kind of in that building, and that was really impactful, and maybe one of the first moments that I thought, hey, this is an organization that I feel like I could really kind of contribute to, and is so vital to the sport.
That's really cool when like a personal passion of like disc golf and that comes together with an opportunity for employment, and you can kind of do something that you love but also do it for work. That's I think that's a goal that a lot of us are chasing out there. So I think that's really neat that you were able to kind of do that. One of the things that's sort of like the impetus for this conversation is that we're, looking at some of the conversation that's happened around the PDGA, and there have been talks about the idea of conflict of interest. And I think, especially with the election going on, there's been a lot of like stir up of conversations of like, what could the PDGA be doing better? What could we work on? And so when thinking about that topic and kind of preparing the first part of the video that everyone's going to have already seen already, I wanted to really think about like what some of the solutions were, and you were top of my mind as someone who I think would be perfect to talk to because of just the dialogue that you've had around really trying to think outside the box. And I imagine from your perspective, it's very difficult, especially with some of the closed nature of how information is shared with the PDGA, to really come into a position like this and formulate ideas because you don't have a lot of the background of what's going on compared to other people on the ballot who are kind of incumbents. They kind of know what's going on in the background already, but that's probably a bit difficult. So one of the things that I really want to know, I think a lot of people might want to know, is the overall opinion of the PDGA. I think is very critical nowadays. People have, PDGA has come under fire for a lot of different things, and when you're the governing body, that's kind of how it works. So what made you want to throw yourself into that fire directly and get involved with the global board of directors?
Yeah, your characterization is totally accurate. The general feeling out there is highly critical towards the PDGA. I don't know that that's entirely new. It's certainly been
Mm-hmm.
my experience since I started working at the PDGA. When you're on staff there, you do kind of feel like you're in the line of fire a lot, always, on the receiving end of criticism and speculation and all these things. So I feel like, I've been in the fire for a number of years. And that kind of feeling, when you're in a group of people and you kind of feel like the world is, um, coming at you and criticizing your every move, it really does form a pretty tight bond, and you kind of feel defensive for yourself and for your coworkers. But there's also a little bit of a feeling of helplessness, especially kind of at that mid-level staff position where you're not really in a position to go out and speak directly to that criticism. You can't go out and give information or those kind of things. You kind of wait for leadership to come in and address these issues. And I think from my experience, especially the instinct of leadership of the PDGA has kind of been to hunker down especially when controversies arise, and just try to weather the storm. That's understandable. That's a perfectly natural instinct when you're under fire from criticism. But ultimately, like you said, that's the government is always going to be on the receiving end of that kind of heat. And as a public servant, which I think is really the way to characterize leadership of the PDGA, is serving the disc golf public. You just need to accept that, and you need to have thick skin and go out and address the issues head on. And I think when people really hear more about the discussions, hear more about the challenging decisions that these leaders have to make, kind of the more humanized those leaders appear, the more sympathetic the critics become, because like they realize, wow, these are not the easiest decisions to make. There's trade-offs basically with every position that you take. So, I think that's one of the reasons I'm pushing transparency, is because I want to lift the veil so people can see that the PDGA, they're good people. They're hardworking people. They're a ton of disc golf experience. I mean, um, so if they do make mistakes, it's not for a lack of trying to do the best thing for the sport. It's just because um, you know when you're faced with tough decisions, some of those are going to blow up, and yeah, that's inevitable.
Yeah, I think when you think about the PDGA and other businesses, we tend to like try to think of them as the same as other larger organizations, but the PDGA has only been around for 50. Next year will be celebrating its 50th year. It's not really that long of a time compared to a lot of companies, and so there's still a lot of, I think, growing pains associated with, especially with the large membership boom they experienced over the last number of years. That I think it just makes things difficult, and it's always, like you said, it's always going to have them come under fire for decisions that are made, because no matter what, there's always going to be somebody who likes the decision and doesn't like the decision, and it can almost feel like you can't win sometimes. But one of the words that you kind of used there as a key tenet was transparency, and I want to talk about the Bill of Rights that you've kind of put together, the Members' Bill of Rights. So when reading through the 10 core tenets that you proposed for your member Bill of Rights, it becomes extremely apparent to me, and probably to anyone reading it, that it becomes very transparent that one of your main priorities is transparency. And so my big question is, why is the practice of transparency so important to you? And then in that same kind of frame, why is it so important for the PDGA and the growth of the sport long term?
Yeah, great question. I think there's 100 different reasons why transparency is important. It's a key tenet of good governance principles in general.
Mm-hmm.
It prevents wrongdoing. If leaders know that their decisions, their comments are going to be seen by the public, they're going to think twice about their decisions. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. These kind of ideas. But I think, like, at the end of the day, the number one reason that transparency is so important is because the members have the vote. We count on our membership to go out and vote in the board of directors, and the board of directors are the ones who make the decisions. And so, um, if we're going to entrust the membership with that vote, we need to give them the information to make responsible decisions. If they can't see what issues are on the table, if they don't really understand how the board members are addressing those issues or comporting themselves on the board, it's hard for me to understand, what basis voters have for a responsible vote. So, there's a ton of good reasons for transparency. I think, voter education is at top of the list.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that kind of leads me into my next question, because there's kind of sometimes I feel like a going joke around, especially when we talk about like the proposed rule changes. People talk about how they put them out. The PGA puts the rule changes out there, but nobody actually reads them except for the people it's like their job to read them. And I hear that from a lot of people that, oh, I'm not going to read that. It's not my problem, or whatever. So it's one thing, I think, to ask for transparency, and I hope that we get it. But it's another challenge to then go on the other side of that, especially what seems like almost a jaded membership. How do we get them to care enough about trying to understand that information and find value about it? Like, how do we change that mindset of the membership to, hey, I got you transparency, but we need you to also care about what you're being presented?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think that no matter what we do, most disc golfers, this is always going to be a secondary concern for them. Governance issues is always going to be a second thought compared to, playing the game themselves, or watching pros play. That's always going to be, what people care most about. But there is that, 10 to 20% of members who do go out and vote every election, the ones who are really, really engaged naturally. And I think those members, the voters, deserve they deserve this information. They deserve to be read in on these issues and to be as well informed as possible. And then there's other ways to kind of bring that other 80% into the fold, by finding new ways to engage them. So, one of the things I've called for in the members' bill of rights is to have an open candidate forum every election cycle, so that we actually get all the candidates kind of on the same stage, or digital stage, engaging with each other, discussing the issues. I think that would be a really great way to kind of um, highlight the contrast between the candidates, so we can really understand their differences. But also, that could be good TV and a great way to kind of see new members kind of watching the election process and getting informed. And then also, just engaging with the media, being more willing to come out make appearances, on Foundation, on debate night, and those kind of shows, and just meet people where they're at. We've been trying the same kind of tactics to engage voters for years, and it hasn't really moved the needle. So, yeah, I'd like to see the PDGA try some new things.
Yeah, that definitely that makes me think of the most recent proposed rule changes, because there was the big push of, hey, we are going to partner with some of these podcasts to get out there and share with people the changes ourselves, as opposed to just pushing out a link to the page and hoping that people read it. And I think trying to be adaptive to, I like the phrase meet people where they're at. That's always been a big thing of mine, is like, how do we meet people, specifically how they like to be presented the information, but also how do we make the information easily digestible for people. And even with the podcast thing, if you look at the number of people who watch a lot of these podcasts, the viewership, it's a fraction of the PDGA membership as a whole. So, there has to be almost like a waterfall of communication strategies to get this information to people. And I think one of the best things that we can do is find a way for the PDGA to make participation straightforward. The straighter the line to doing something, the easier it's going to be for people. And one thing that doesn't take a whole lot of effort for a member to be able to do is to vote in the PDGA election. It's literally a link to click, a list of names, and obviously there's the background of trying to know who you're voting for and stuff like that. But it's, I think, probably one of the more simple ways we can get members involved. So why do you think it's really important that members of like the broader membership vote in this election cycle and then any election cycle going forward?
Um, yes, it's a good question. I think it's first of all, it's the right as members. As dues paying members, the PDGA controls where that money is spent, controls the direction of the sport, and so it's really just a great opportunity for a member to exercise that right. But also, it sends a message, I think, to PDGA leadership about the engagement of the members. I hear, a lot of counter arguments to some of the proposals I've been making are that, well, members really they just don't care about this stuff. They just want to go throw. They don't care what the PDGA does. They don't know. They don't care. So by going out and voting in, maybe higher than past elections, higher numbers than past elections, I think that voters can really make a statement that, what, we do care about these issues, and especially when opportunity is presented like the one that I'm trying to present voters this cycle with a clear path, a clear proposal. There's a real opportunity to kind of make a statement and come and say this is something we really support. And then of course there's the downside risk too, which is that if I come out with this transparency and this Bill of Rights proposal, and then there's apathy and nobody comes out and votes, and the thing fails, that also sends a message. So the voters, the members, they're stakeholders in the sport, they're stakeholders in the PDGA, and there's upside and downside risk to that. So people need to take that responsibility seriously.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I think people need to get involved with the votes to know what's going on, because I have always been a personal advocate for, if you aren't going to be part of the solution, it's hard for me to say that you're allowed to sit back and criticize, even though technically people are allowed to, of course. But when you have such a direct and straightforward path to being able to affect change in some way, I mean, I know that members might argue, like, what level of actual change will happen if I vote this person in or this person in, because of some of the other things, like, how topics of conversation are even approached at meetings and stuff like that. But by taking the first step of getting the right people in the right seat, I think it goes a very, very long way. And to me, in an ideal world, you're going to be on the global board of directors, but let's say there is a possible future here where you don't get elected and it doesn't turn out that way. Does this movement for openness and transparency kind of stop at that point, or are you looking to continue to push for the Bill of Rights that you've proposed and just being an advocate for transparency? Does that stop with the election if it doesn't go the right way, or does that continue for you?
It certainly doesn't stop. If I
Hmm.
don't win the election, that's really an important point. That these issues are way larger than me or my campaign. So I'm confident that these issues will continue to be discussed. Foundation has done a great job of bringing these issues to the light, and there's other voices out there that have been kind of hammering this issue for a long time. So I know I'm not alone, and the issue is not going to go away with me. But the truth is, the campaign's going to need to continue even if I win the election, because I'm just one seat on the board, and the president of the board of directors is the one who sets the agenda. So it's likely that even if I get on the board, my proposals won't even get a real up or down vote, possibly even for the first year. Going to take a continued effort, probably a couple of successful election cycles of recruiting like-minded candidates, making these issues, bringing these issues to the forefront of voters' attention. So, win or lose, this campaign's got to continue.
Gotcha. That makes total sense, and I'm glad to hear that that's a fight that you want to keep doing because I think that's the whole point of why people need to vote in this election cycle is that if you really care about transparency, knowing that it could take, 6 months, a year, 2 years to even get the cogs moving, that we don't have time to wait for the next election cycle and the next election cycle and the next election cycle. Like now is the time to affect change because we need to get those wheels turning as soon as possible. And I hope that you're met with that same positivity from the other board members, or at least given an avenue early enough to share your thoughts, no matter what the outcome of the election is going to be. But before, I obviously don't want to take up a lot of your time. Before I let you go today, I think, is there anything that you feel like the people need to know about you, about your campaign? Like, where can people find you, find information, support you? Let people know.
Yeah. you know, Before I even started this campaign for the board, I my biggest project this year was to start to dig into the history of the sport and the PDGA, and I'm in the process of writing a kind of a comprehensive history that I'm hoping to release next year. It's going to be called Steady: The Untold History of Disc Golf. It really focuses on the evolution of the sport and kind of the institutions around it, how we got to where we are today. Because an insider, as a PDGA staffer, it was shocking to me how little I knew about this history. And the more I learned about it as I was doing this research, the more convinced I became that this was a really important initiative, that we bring this history to the light and kind of put it in a form that is accessible for people. Because if we don't know how we got to where we're at, it seems very unlikely that we're going to be able to make good decisions about where we're going in the future.
100%. And for those out there who are wondering like where they can find your Bill of Rights, we're going to include a link to that in the description for the video. So make sure to go check those out. I think it's a lot of great pieces of information that we should be advocating for as members as often as we possibly can. But thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with me and the viewers out there. I think we need more transparency, obviously at the PDGA level, but just to be able to know what candidates like you are trying to bring to the table and just how it can affect change for the future. So, from my end, best of luck with the remainder of your campaigning. I know we've only got a number of days left for voting in the election overall, and I hope that in however long it takes, that maybe we can have another conversation again after you're an official global board of directors member.
I would love it. That's definitely a priority for me. I won't be a stranger, and always open to answering questions. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yep. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day, sir.
You too, Gary.
As all of you can clearly see, Matthew makes a lot of great points regarding the value of transparency within our sport. A link to his member Bill of Rights can be found in the description down below. And if you haven't voted for the PDGA Global Board of Directors positions yet, make sure that you do that before the end of the month. You can vote by going to the email address that you have registered with the PDGA. They have sent emails to you prompting you to vote with instructions on how to do so and where to find information on the candidates. It might be in your spam folder, but double check. It's really important to do that. And also, let me just say, before I wrap up here, that I would love to invite anyone from the PDGA who would love to talk about the bylaws, transparency, and the topics mentioned in this video to reach out, and we can sit down for a one-on-one conversation. I have always been an advocate and belief that having both sides of any story and all angles is incredibly important. Also, I'd love to know what all of you listening and watching think. Is open transparency something that you would like to see from the PDGA? Did you know about the early Constitution and some of the historical information from this video? And finally, is there something that you want to see us dive deeper into over here on this channel? Let us know in the comments section down below, and thank you again for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that like button, and if you're not already, please consider hitting the subscribe button to not miss the latest and greatest happenings going on in disc golf. And to everyone out there, thank you so much for your time and watching, and we'll see you next time.